Our next speaker is Michael Schratt. He's spoken twice at our crash retrieval conference. I think he was here in 07. He missed 08. Michael is a private pilot and a military aerospace historian, currently working as an aerospace draftsman near Chicago. Michael has lectured across the country on unique subject of mystery aircraft and the classified propulsion systems buried deep within military-industrial complex. A guest speaker at the Oshkosh AirVenture 2006 event, the world's largest air show. How many people have ever been to Oshkosh? Just a handful. It's one of those things. It's on my lifelong list to do. It's sort of a must-do thing. If you're at all interested in aviation, it's something you need to try to visit. Michael has developed a number of contacts which have had firsthand experience in dealing with classified black programs, including former USAF pilots, retired naval personnel, aerospace engineers that have maintained top-secret Q magic clearance. Michael Schratt went to the Center of UFO Studies, CUFOS. How many people have ever been to CUFOS in Chicago? No one, Michael. No. We got one. Oh, there's Paul Davids. There's another researcher. I haven't been there either, so I'm as guilty as everybody else. And for 3 years, mind you, he reviewed nearly 50,000 case histories looking only at compelling visual UFO events, compelling visual. So this is going to be a very visual presentation. He will present a fully illustrated and well-documented lecture using technical engineering drawings and full-color visual aids, specifically focusing on the most shocking UFO case files originating from the CUFOS Archives. Please help me welcome Mr. Michael Schratt.
And what I'd like to do for you is to give you a brief overview of some of the bombshell cases within the Center for UFO Studies. Now, CUFOS is actually located at 2457 West Peterson Avenue, and they have really comprised an incredible selection of case files from around the world. This includes NICAP, the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, the APRO files, they have the in-house International UFO Reporter, the FSR or Flying Saucer Review, cases from England, Germany, Russia, Japan, China, Canada, South America, Australia, over 50,000 cases in total. Now I want to take you back to 1946 in Neubiberg, Germany. This is a photograph of the Luftwaffe boneyard. And you'll notice that a lot of these warbirds are derelict, dilapidated, disrepair. They've been forgotten. They've been left for dead for months now. This is immediately after World War II. And you'll notice that the skin seams have now been completely oxidized. Many of the windshields have been completely broken. There's birds living in the cockpit. You'll notice that some of the flight control systems have been completely tattered. There's paint ripped off of these. And basically the bottom line is these warbirds have been left for dead. Now that accurately illustrates the condition of many of these case files within the CUFOS archives. They have been forgotten for 50, 60 years. A lot of these cases date back to prior to 1900. And so my contribution to this field is I decided to undertake a 3-year investigation of all 50,000 of these cases, picking only the cases that had the appropriate paperwork and documentation to go with it, a case file, and most importantly, an illustration or drawing or photograph to go with that. From that point forward, I created an AutoCAD drawing from the original sketch, maintaining historical accuracy, and then from that AutoCAD drawing that was cleaned up, I created a 3D solid model, full color rendering from that. Now there's 2 points I want to make up clear right here is I didn't make up any of this information on my own. Each one of these cases has an actual case file number to go with it. And number 2, what I'm presenting today is strictly to be understood as a computer-generated forensic composite illustration. These are not to be interpreted as actual authenticated photographs. They're strictly to be understood as visual aids to help people get a general idea of what some of these craft actually look like. Now, I thought it would be important if we start here with a quote from Mark Twain, who stated that truth is stranger than fiction because fiction has to make sense. Some of these cases are so crazy, so zany, so wacky, you can't make this stuff up. This is just off the radar screen. So let's roll here. This is September 4th, 1967, Thessaloniki, Greece. Two brothers were repairing stereo equipment on the top of their third-floor apartment building, and they noticed a very interesting saucer-shaped craft go directly over their heads at 25 feet altitude. That's how low it was. And eventually this thing went out of sight. But the point being is that when this thing flew over, and he used the term it glided over, it actually moved upon an oil path in the sky. That was his direct quote. This thing did not fly on the principles of aerodynamics that we know them today. It had a number of square portholes along the circumference of the vehicle. This is actual sketch that he made of this craft, approximately 25 feet in diameter. And this is the cleaned up rendering here. So this case is now part of the historical record. I've also inserted a number of these cases. These are the Otto Binder reports, vintage 1965. He received thousands of reports from all around the world of the most interesting cases, and I thought just to maintain historical legacy, these should be a part of the record. July 1st, 1966, Thomas Grogan and two friends, Danville, Virginia, saw a weird dogfight as a B-52 chased and machine-gunned a UFO, which seemingly burst into red pieces, although with the possibility that this was only camouflage, allowing the real saucer to escape unseen. So this is just one case of at least 4 B-52 encounters. July 3rd, 1959, Blenheim, New Zealand. A very interesting case where a woman was tending to her 9-acre field at the time, and she noticed a very unusual saucer-shaped craft descend just below the cloud banks. She noticed that it had 2 high-intensity green beaming lights coming straight down onto the ground. There was a transparent rectangular cockpit in the upper section of the disc, and then just below that section, which did maintain stationary, there were 2 counter-rotating plates that were emitting flames. And when this thing came close, the flames stopped, and what happened next was the lights turned on inside this clear transparent canopy, and there were 2 beings that were looking toward each other, very small. The helmets that these beings were wearing, they were transparent or slightly opaque, came down to their shoulders right in this area right here. The one on the right side stayed in his position. The one on the left side got up. He put his hands onto the transparent canopy like he was looking over at something, got back into his seat. The contra-rotating plates began again. The fire came out again, and then this thing took off at a higher rate of speed. Mystery Machine, June 5th, 1966. John Lurman and family, Vineyard, New Jersey, came upon a mystery craft with 3 red rectangular lights below and 1 circular white light that blinked constantly, remaining in view several minutes before speeding away. November 2nd, 1973, Manchester, New Hampshire, another very interesting case. A woman was driving home from work when a very unusual globe-shaped or sphere-shaped golden colored craft followed her home. It was pacing her vehicle at 50 miles an hour. Eventually, she got within 100 feet, and you can see the illustration here. Within 100 feet, it had a hexagonal, honeycomb-shaped exterior, glistening, shiny. And there was a very interesting oval-shaped, transparent window embedded into the center or upper left-hand portion of this vehicle. A strange being who was in back of a black console was looking out at her. It seemed to be magnetically locked to her position. She noticed that it had oval-shaped, egg-shaped eyes with black pupils, and then there was this slit for a mouth, and then these interesting, somewhat rough skin just below the eyes. So very interesting case. Then this thing took off, flew off at a higher rate of speed, now a part of the historical record. July 9th, 1965, At the Azores airport, a slow-flying UFO cruised overhead, killing all aircraft engines for a time and stopping all electric clocks until it later vanished from sight. So another good physical evidence case where there's an interaction between UFOs and internal combustion engines and electronic instruments. September 70, Madura, Australia. 2 men were driving down a highway not too far from the ocean, and they didn't see this craft, but the shadow was casted in front of them. This is the drawing here, 45 feet in diameter, approximately 40 feet high. The driver of the vehicle was quite frightened. He depressed the accelerator and got out of there at a high rate of speed. June 29th, 1965, near Velsor, France, a huge flying saucer landed and 2 beings stepped out. After it took off, depressions were left by its landing gear legs with the dirt compressed harder than concrete. So again, physical trace cases on more than just one vehicle. November 24th, 1978, Seville, Spain. Another interesting case where 4 individuals were going out hunting at night. They carried flashlights with them, and they came upon a very interesting inverted earthen jar that had a red light on top. There were multicolored lights along the circumference of the craft. The being, which was in front of the craft, was wearing a black, tight-fitted flight suit. He had a transparent or chrome section over his facial area there. You can see the rendering of what this actually looked like. Now, they decided that they weren't going to stick around. They returned the next day and found where these pads were on the surface, it did make a mark, so there was a physical trace case on that one. July 15th, 1965, at the NASA tracking station in Canberra, Australia, a hovering UFO created static and blocked off signals to the Mars Mariner craft for several hours as if sampling Earth's telemetry system. May 29th, 1979, Calusa, California. Now, this is interesting because the direction of flight on this vehicle is right over here. It is a base forward flying craft. It is not a pointed forward flying craft. There were 2 lights on the ends of the vehicle, 1 light up front, and then 3 years prior to this case, this is a view looking from the bottom, looking up toward the vehicle. The one on the side here at the bottom, that was seen from a head-on view. So it may, in point of fact, been the same vehicle, but at 2 different time frames. August 8th, 1962, Scott McLean spied a strangely shaped UFO colored bright orange, estimated to be 60 feet long and hovering at a height of 3,000 feet for some 15 seconds, then shooting away at an amazing speed. March 1958, Algeria. This is a single eyewitness case. So we want to have cases that have more than one eyewitness, but in this case, there was a single eyewitness. A military officer noticed a very strange humming noise in the ambient atmosphere. He described it as being something equivalent to taking an empty Coke bottle and blowing over the neck of this. So it was a low-frequency hum. As soon as that happened, this vehicle descended, which was 1,000 feet in diameter. It had a high-intensity green light that came out from the bottom. It was there for 45 minutes. After that time period, he heard the identical noise again. Then this thing shot away, now a part of the historical record. Reported by George D. Fawcett, UFO investigator, April 18, 1962, power station at Eureka, Utah, shorted out by ground-shaking thump of a landing UFO which had been tracked by radar at 2 nearby Air Force bases. August 1962, Lake Movie, Minnesota. A mother was combing her daughter's hair when she noticed a red light hovering 2 feet above their local pier just outside their cabin. So she was really interested in this, and she decided, well, I'm going to see what I can do. So she shut off the cabin lights because there were some ambient light effects there. As soon as she shut off those cabin lights, the light in this vehicle shut off. She could see in the ambient red lights of this craft the form of 3 beings. When this thing shut off its light, she got out of her cabin, started running down to see this thing up close. When she got within 50 feet of the pier, this thing took off. she couldn't see it anymore. In 1961, a Soviet mail plane disappeared for 2 days, then was found intact near Tobelka, Siberia, with its pilot and 3 passengers missing, presumably kidnapped by a flying saucer during flight. JAL Flight 1628, November 17, 1986, Anchorage, Alaska. This is one of my favorite cases. A 747, this is a cargo 747, so there were no passengers on this vehicle, pilot, co-pilot only. They were flying at 35,000 feet. They were traveling at 600 miles an hour over Anchorage, Alaska, and they were trailed by 3. This illustration shows 2, but they were, in point of fact, 3 almond-shaped, golden flying saucers trailing the 747. They actually got up near the nose of the craft, circled the 747 3 times. Now, what's interesting here is the onboard TCAS of the 747 went off, so that's 1. We had visual confirmation by both pilot and co-pilot, that's 2. Number 3, we had ATC from Anchorage. They confirmed it on their radar, that's 4. 3 or 4. Finally, we had the Air Force Base in Anchorage. They picked it up on their radar. So we had 4 independent sources picking this thing up. Now, after it circled the craft, one of the vehicles, according to the pilot, was twice as big as an aircraft carrier. Circled the vehicle, took off at a high rate of speed. He said that this could not have been survived by human pilots. Multiple G maneuvers here. Very difficult to survive by human pilots. The plane landed safely, but the problem is the pilot, who was just being honest with people, he was fired for reporting this. It made the news all over the world, 1986. Later on, he was reinstated. So, again, this is a very interesting case of craft that are just tremendous in size. At the Rybinsk missile base in Russia, a nervous battery commander opened fire on a giant toroid UFO with escort saucers, but the missiles were stopped by an invisible protective force. July 13th, 1968, Reunion Island, France. A gentleman was picking grass for his rabbits, believe it or not, and he encountered a very strange craft that was elliptical in shape, egg-shaped. The ends of the vehicle were blue, dark in color. It had a transparent section in the beginning, or the front of the vehicle. There were 2 Michelin Man humanoids embedded inside the craft, and then it had these dorsal and ventral glass bases that were slightly opaque. So he walked up to this thing, no more than 30 seconds, and one of these beings turned, faced him. The other one was just off his left shoulder looking at him. He did not look at the witnesses. There was a huge spark of light, and then this thing disappeared. A Geiger counter was brought on base at the site, and there was a residual radiation effect. He also did suffer the effects of radiation, so there was a physical case, 2 different confirmations of that. March 1966, among the many kinds of strange UFOs seen during the Ann Arbor flap was a double-humped saucer with a patchwork outer surface plus bristly spines. So I ask all of you, does this look like something Lockheed would build? Does this look like something Northrop would put together? Let's give these guys the benefit of the doubt. If we have 10 aerospace contractors out there, Lockheed, Rockwell, Boeing, General Dynamics, Martin, we've got all these contractors, and we'll say that there's 10 prime aerospace contractors. Each one is building 10 flying saucers, so 10 times 10 is 100. But if you look at the historical legacy and documents and how far this phenomenon goes back to the ancient Romans, back to the ancient Egyptians, you'll find out really quick that there are just thousands of different models, thousands of different configurations. It's just not, accurate and consistent with the historical record to say that all these are man-made vehicles. Maury Island, June 21st, 1947, near Tacoma, Washington. 6 donut-shaped vehicles were flying over Puget Sound at that time. One of them suffered some type of malfunction. A father and son were in their boat at the very same time, and as one of these craft was having trouble, It started descending in altitude. It started falling like a wrinkled leaf. And just before it impacted the water, it started spewing out a molten lava, hot metal slag-type material. This material fell down, broke the mast of the ship, also broke the young boy's arm, so there was 2 physical traces. That vehicle that was in trouble joined the other 5, and then they all sped away at a high rate of speed. So this happened before Roswell. March 23rd, 1966, in Oklahoma, an electronics expert of Shepherd Air Force Base found his car blocked by an unearthly craft parked across the highway with 2 human-like persons apparently making repairs. Now, the fact that this landed on a street and was making repairs will become a little more important as we go on here. February 5th, 1971, Kunola, Finland. Really interesting case. 2 chainsaw gentlemen, or loggers, were finishing up their day's work. One of them was turned to the back of this vehicle. The other saw this craft descending by the trees here, and landing gear legs came out, and then to his shock and surprise, another one of these Michelin Man humanoids levitated in the vertical position down from the porthole that was in the center of this vehicle. And this gentleman was shocked, so he talked to his workmate, his coworker next to him, and he started getting a little more confidence because he turned his chainsaw back on again and ran after this being. Because he felt he had more confidence at that. This being, which had a really difficult time walking just to this illustration right here, he turned around and started going back to the ship. He got under that circular port, started levitating up, but before he got there, the gentleman with the chainsaw actually grabbed his foot, his left foot, as he was going up, and it burned him red hot. So the bottom of the line is don't mess with these Michelin Man guys. I mean, it's important. June 22nd, 1966, in Brazil, Indiana, a family said it was no joke when they sighted a saucer shaped like a cup turned upside down, hovering overhead for 15 minutes. And then the subtitle here, they did not appreciate one reporter's fictitious remarks, if you saw a cup, where was the saucer? July 1967, Detroit. There's not much to go with this case. There wasn't a lot of text to go with this case, so I had to just extrapolate the data from the original drawing. But this was an interesting case of a multicolored microprocessor light UFO over Detroit, and it was about 100 feet in diameter, approximately 25 to 30 feet across, with these multicolored computer lights along the circumference of the vehicle, which was rotating along the vertical axis. July 7th, 1968, witnessed by thousands, a fleet of 9 flying saucers flew over Seattle just at the time Rudy Muspena was coming in for landing at Boeing Field. November 2nd, 1967, the Ririe, Idaho case. This is one of my favorite cases. Just an incredible case. 2 gentlemen were returning from work. There was a spark of white light off the right of their peripheral vision. They were still driving down the highway as this happened. Now, as soon as this happened, they saw this particular vehicle, which had polished chrome, semi-gunship metal type exterior. It had a clear, transparent bubble canopy, about 8 feet in diameter. Now, when they saw this, it was magnetically locked to the hood of their vehicle as they were going down the road. So it was just ahead of their hood of the vehicle and just about a foot above. So it was traveling down the road with them. A few seconds later, the bubble canopy popped open, and a very strange 3-foot-tall humanoid being with a 6-inch diameter head. Think about this, a 6-inch diameter head. He popped out of the bubble canopy. He had a backpack on his back. He proceeded to open up the car door. The car had stopped by this time. The 2 people in the car were just literally horrified. They went over to the right side of the vehicle. This being got below the driver's side area. He got by the wheel of the vehicle. It didn't explain how this 3-foot being reached the pedals of the car. But what happened next was he drove this vehicle by himself about 75 feet off the road, And this may seem to be a comical thing, but I want to provide some additional background because we're pushing the level of credibility here. This is the original redrawn sketch from the original. Small men, approximately 3 foot tall, skin wearing rough-wearing backpacks, tight-fitting one-piece clothing. The point is that the faces of these beings were very rough. It was almost a hamburger meat type appearance, very odd shape. Now, the flames that were coming down, they were described as not looking exactly like flames. They looked more like lights that were stopping below the vehicle. That's very interesting because how do you get a light to stop at a specific range, kind of like a lightsaber? This is a very interesting technology. So, here's the report here. November 2nd, 1967, near Ririe, Idaho, the car of Guy Tossell and Will Beggy suddenly came to a halt by itself when a small flying saucer and its 2 humanoid pilots appeared out of nowhere. Now, the one gentleman who was on the passenger side of the vehicle, he was horrified, he bugged out, he ran over to the next house. The other gentleman who stayed in the vehicle, the being attempted to communicate with this person by a high-frequency bird chirping noise. Just crazy. He could not communicate with him, and then the authorities arrived and found this gentleman inside the car in a complete daze. Now, if we just had this to go on, this would be kind of a weak case, and really it's borderline comic material, and I would agree with most everyone here. This is just outlandish. This is crazy. This is really not believable. I would believe that, except if it weren't for the fact of this case. Interesting case. December 8th, 1967. This was a 15-year-old girl who was waiting outside her house to be picked up. Take a look at what she found. Take a look at what she saw. Almost the identical shaped craft with a bubble canopy, 2 beings on front, and a very interesting bobbing flight pattern, almost mimicking mirror image the Ririe, Idaho case. So, again, there's a historical legacy.
That was a month later?
Let's see. December 8th, 1967, January 1st, 1970. So, very close to a month later. 3 years later, right. November 2nd, 1967. Okay. January 1st, 1970, Vancouver Island. A nurse noticed some commotion in one of her patient's bunk bed areas. She went to check on him to open up the window to get some air into the room, and when she opened up that shade, she saw a very interesting saucer-shaped craft with a bubble canopy, 2 beings that looked like they were in front of control panels. There were rotating lights along the circumference of the vehicle, and this is very consistent with the other 2 cases that we just examined. So again, the historical legacy, this thing took off in a blinding flash of light. January 24th, 1968, at Indiana, Pennsylvania, a witness saw a saucer hovering over a pond with 2 occupants who were apparently repairing their equipment. Again, very similar in appearance to the other cases. November 9th, 1968, Lakeland, Florida. A housewife was frightened to find a UFO floating over her home with 2 strange figures staring through a dome down at her. So we've presented at least 5 different cases, different timelines, almost the identical configuration of the craft. February 3rd, 1983, Mobile, Alabama. This lady who was returning from work, she was driving down the car. She heard a very low-frequency banging thud noise. She pulled her vehicle over to the side of the road, thinking that the transmission went on her car. Checked the vehicle. There was nothing wrong with the car at all, but she noticed just outside the forest area an interesting light that she saw that kept getting closer and closer, and then she could see that there was this vehicle hovering above the local forest area, about 200 feet in length. Now, if we'll start on the bottom here, you'll notice that there were a number of reflective square panels at the lower section of this vehicle. Now, this is interesting because if we watched V last Tuesday, they also had reflective panels under the ship of this vehicle too. There was a transparent dome section here where beings could be seen. She also said that she could see inside a number of these portholes where there was a, quote, truss beam construction and riveted plates together. So again, are aliens using rivets to fasten their vehicles together? Very interesting. She also said that on the top of the craft, there was also a cutaway transparent area where beings were being seen, but they weren't looking at her. She said it, quote, looked like they were changing shift. They weren't concerned with the witness at all. It was just like they were going about their general business. Just below that transparent area, there's a section right in here that is opaque, could not see through that. And then over in this area here, there were 2 8-foot square indentations that came out from the craft, and then about 16-inch diameter shafts coming out of the vehicle. This thing slowly departed the area, but it was reported in the APRO files. Canadian UFO report talking about USOs. Now, we've been talking about UFOs today and this week, but we're talking about USOs, unidentified submerged objects. These cases go back over 100 years, very solid case files. Invisible Residence by Ivan T. Sanderson, The Reality of Underwater UFOs. Interesting case file from his book. It came from beneath the sea. Dr. Ruben J. Valea, a Brazilian scientist aboard an icebreaker in Admiralty Bay, Antarctic, was shocked out of his senses when he saw a strange craft shoot up from the sea through more than 37 feet of solid ice. If you think about the implications of what that means, this took place in 1965 in Antarctica in something called the Navy's Operation Deep Freeze program. The icebreaker was not too far from where this happened, so they got a good view of this thing. Now, when this thing shot out, it was a pointed bullet-shaped vehicle, went straight up into the vertical, shot out of the field of view, but he noticed that when this thing broke through the ice, large chunks of ice were thrown near the ship, and where the hole was left, the water was boiling. It was boiling. So, now, our nuclear-powered Trident subs, they can do this too. They also surface in the Antarctic. You can see that right here. The conning tower is in this location. But the problem is, they just about have a max theoretical limit of 36 inches of ice. We're talking about 37 feet of ice. If you try to do this with a nuclear-powered submarine through 37 feet of solid ice, number one, you would break the conning tower, or number two, if you tried to go with the bow of the submarine first, you would cause a hull breach in the submarine, and this thing would fill up with water and go down to the bottom of the ocean. So who had the technology in 1965 to break through 37 feet of solid ice? I definitely asked that question. August 4th, 2006, off the coast of Long Beach. This case was actually reported on UFO case files, UFO Hunters, not too long ago. This gentleman saw this vehicle approached. This was between Long Island and Catalina Island, just off the coast of Long Island. It descended, got within about 10 feet of the Long Beach. That's correct, thanks. It did a 360 along its vertical axis, and then it shot up. The blue lights under the vehicle stopped, and then away. So we have his case on file now. April 1958, northeast Brazil. This vehicle, or this craft, was described as being the diameter of a traveling circus show. So whatever that means is up to you. Approximately 200 feet in diameter. Gentleman was walking down the beach at the time. He saw 2 other people who were pointing out to the far ocean area, and he asked them, "What are you guys looking at here?" They were looking at this vehicle descending and ascending, and every time it got near the ocean, the water began to boil. That's very similar to the Ivan T. Sanderson. So there's an interaction between a lot of these UFOs and what's taking place under our oceans. This is the rendering of what that craft looked like. April 19th, 1959, near Japan, aboard a fishing boat, the amazed crew spotted 2 saucers diving into the ocean at terrific speed, yet no wreckage was ever found, as if the UFOs had deliberately submerged for an underwater trip. June 3rd, 1961, Sayona, Italy, Giacomo Barra and his companions felt waves rocking their motorboat, then saw a huge UFO rise up out of the sea and sail off through the sky as if equally at home in the ocean or in the air. This is a great case. 1882, near Ascension Isle, a British steamer came upon a gigantic UFO floating in the ocean at least 800 feet long, or nearly as big as the Queen Elizabeth, which slowly sank beneath the waves and vanished from sight. So who in 1882 had an 800-foot-long elliptical craft that floated on the ocean, then descended? Who knows if this thing had the capability of flying away, but this is way before the invention of flight with the Wright brothers at Kitty Hawk, North Carolina, December of 1903. November 13th, 1833, a crowd of both the American and Canadian sides saw a peculiar square-shaped UFO hover over Niagara Falls for an hour, after which it sped away toward the ocean. Interesting case, a square-shaped object near the Niagara Falls area. May 1967, Mr. X of Anderson, South Carolina, was fishing on Hartwell Lake and saw an octagonal UFO apparently pumping up water through a metal tube. Mr. X was never near enough to cast and strike the object, but nobody came out and it soon shot away into the sky. August 1914, Georgian Bay, Canada, William J. Keel and friends all stared astonished at a UFO that landed on the bay with two little men in square helmets hosing up water into their craft, after which it flew away swiftly. The 8,260 saucer sightings that Dr. Jacques Vallée put through his computer included 1,517 foreign reports, of which fully half were at sea, indicating that 50% of all UFOs may be flying over the oceans for unknown purposes. May 22nd, 1974, Ontario, Canada. 4 gentlemen were on a fishing trip. They saw this vehicle 1 nautical mile from their campsite. It was flickering. It was a little bit dark just after dusk. They could see the multicolored lights reflecting on the lake section there. Here's the drawing of what this thing actually looked like. You could see that the light sections were embedded in the interior of the vehicle. It also had these Apollo landing gear pads near the outward circumference of the craft. 18th century, most celebrated UFO report came from 2 astronomers in 1762 who observed a gigantic spindle crossing the sun's face, obviously being in orbit around the Earth. December 1976, Dana Point, California. A mother, her son, and their daughter were driving down a road that was parallel to Pacific Coast Highway near Dana Point, California, and she was shocked to see through her windshield a gigantic, what she called a fat Frisbee type vehicle at about a 30-degree angle of attack. It had thousands of miniature multicolored micro lights along the circumference of the vehicle. There was a red light on top. She saw this for about 4 minutes until this thing departed westerly over the ocean. This is the original sketch, the view looking outside the windshield. Dana Point, California. Fat Frisbee case, craft and thousands of computer-like lights along the circumference. 19th century's most outstanding sighting was in 1874 at Oxano, Mexico, where a giant trumpet hovered in the sky, swinging gently for 6 minutes, observed by many stunned people. January 14th, 1981, Garrettsville, Ohio. This is the only information we have on this case, the original sketch. This vehicle was seen by one single eyewitness, 15-degree angle of attack. The flight path was from the right to the left. You'll notice here that on the left side of the craft there was a very high-intensity white light. On the right of the vehicle there was a red light. And along the circumference of the vehicle were these amber lights, and then this thing departed to the left of the field of view. October 12th, 1796, on Columbus Day over 170 years ago, Canadian observers reported an astonishing fleet of airships, UFOs, with portholes and visible occupants sailing over the Bay of Fundy from the Pacific Stars and Stripes. The bow and arrow case, September 4th, 1964, Cisco Grove, California. This has got to be probably the weirdest case in all of ufology, bar none. This has got to be the most strange case. I'll try to break it down for you the best I can here. 3 men were going out bow hunting in Cisco Grove, California. It was getting near dark. One of the gentlemen lost his way. He did not get back to the original group. And he saw this white light descending to his location, and so he thought, great, this is the rescue helicopter. I'm going to be saved. And so he was relieved at that. And as this thing was getting closer, he lit 3 campfires on 3 large rocks that were near his location. Now, as this thing started descending, he found out that this was no helicopter, but this was a elliptical, very vague and nebulous shaped craft with 3 rectangular portholes along the length or horizontal axis of the vehicle. This craft landed, there was a spark of light, and he saw something black come out of one of these squares. Didn't see it actually happen, but he could sense that something came out of this vehicle. A few minutes later, he heard a cracking in the brush behind him, and he saw a very unusual nebulous being who had these rubber reinforcement sections on the elbows, a tight-fitting, bright white flight suit, no discernible mouth. This thing came up near to where he was. He was completely shocked. He climbed the local tree that was near him, and his bow was with him. He had 3 arrows. 2 minutes later, another being identical to the first followed that one. After that, they departed the area, and then what happened next was this robotic-type humanoid, it came out of one of those squares, and it locked itself directly below the tree that he had climbed up earlier. Now, what happened next was, when this thing got to the lower section of that tree, it started emitting this mist that caused this gentleman to go out for about 2 minutes, and this went on all night long, at least 10 different times. So what he was trying to do was repel this creature because he was absolutely horrified by this thing. You can see the spec here calls out that it was approximately 5 feet tall. The hood or helmet came straight down to the shoulders. It had square shoulders. Vapor came from the open mouth. He started burning everything that he had on his person. He burned his hunting license, all his money. He took his cap off. He threw it to the ground. And every time that flame went out, this thing came back again. After this had gone on all night, and just before dawn, another one of these robotic creatures came out, and they went at it again. And just before dawn, both these robotic creatures faced one another. There was a huge electrical arc discharge between them, and he had already launched 3 of his arrows dead center into the chest of this craft. The next thing he knew, he was hanging by his belt loop in the tree. His bow was on the ground. All the beings had left, and it was completely gone. He eventually joined up with his other group, and this is now a part of the historical record. But I want to take a look at this. Where have all of you seen this before? I pose this question to you. Where have all of you seen this before? Or does this look at all familiar with, is somebody trying to tell us something here? Is Hollywood trying to tell us something? If you do a side-by-side comparison of the Iron Giant and the Cisco Grove robot, you'll look, they're almost identical, except for the Iron Giant has this spade-shaped section on the top. But other than that, the jaw is almost identical. The large eyes are similar. So again, is Hollywood trying to tell us something? Is Hollywood a belated designer leak or a foreshadowing of things to come? I leave that question to you. February 3rd, 1907, 2 Englishmen sighted a giant lantern in the sky flying low over the countryside and lighting up the night scenery vividly for 20 minutes before it went out like a light. August 18th, 1966, over Boston. Now, there are 2 significant factors to this case, one of which is that the upper section of this craft was rotating at a high rate of speed. It had very highly reflected ribbing section on the upper section. The other interesting point is this is the original sketch from the actual case file. Look at the flight path of how this thing was flying. It was almost fluttering and teetering like a leaf, similar to that Idaho case. July 18, 1968, villagers in Campeggio, Chile, were frightened by a giant armor-plated machine covered with steel scales whose twin searchlight eyes stabbed down brilliantly. So again, who had the technology in 1868, before the Wright brothers in 1903, to fly an iron-clad vehicle with high-intensity white beams coming straight down? Interesting question. Homestead Air Force Base, February 1973. This case was eloquently described in Richard Dolan's latest book. It's no secret that Jackie Gleason is a paranormal UFO nut. He's got a very large collection of UFO books that are now a part of the University of Miami. During a 1973 golf outing, President Nixon and Jackie Gleason were on the golf course, and somewhere around the hole 10 or something, the subjects of UFOs came up. Specific details of that conversation have never been released, but we do know that Jackie Gleason had a UFO house built, custom built. It was called the Mothership. To his shock and surprise, Jackie Gleason, the very same day, the very same night around 12 midnight, showed up unannounced at Jackie Gleason's house, driving his own car. I mean, this sounds crazy, but he was President Nixon. President Nixon was driving his own car, and they proceeded to go to Homestead Air Force Base in Florida, where they went past the security guard, the secure area at Homestead Air Force Base. And according to the report, Jackie Gleason was shown by Richard Nixon alien bodies and an extraterrestrial craft. Didn't say from what crash retrieval, but according to Jackie Gleason, quote, "We've got him." So here's Jackie Gleason claiming that this was true. Now his ex-wife, Beverly McKintrick, she validates and authenticated the case. USS Franklin Delano Roosevelt, late 1958, Gitmo, Cuba. The USS FDR has had multiple UFO encounters for years. This isn't the first case. But in this particular case, there was a large commotion below decks. All these men were trying to get on the flight deck as soon as they can. And what they saw was a 100-foot-long cigar-shaped vehicle hovering 100 feet off the flight deck. Multiple eyewitnesses saw this. There was a heat signature coming down from the vehicle. That's what you can see in this original case file report. They could feel the heat on their face. Now, there was a series of square portholes along the length of this vehicle. There were beings looking outside this craft. But what's interesting here is the FDR was the first aircraft carrier to carry thermonuclear weapons. That may be one reason why it was trailing the FDR. October 13th, 1917, gathering for a faith-healing people outside the town of Fatima, Portugal, cited an enormous flying coin. Number of witnesses, 70,000 eyewitnesses. September 12th, 1952, Flatwoods, West Virginia. 4 boys were playing football at the local schoolyard. They saw a craft descend on the local hill not too far from their location. Curiosity got the best of them. They started going up the hill. They stopped by a woman's house. That woman and her 2 sons joined the original group, so there were now 7 eyewitnesses. When they got to the top of the hill, 100 feet to the right side, they saw a red, glowing, elliptical-shaped craft. 100 feet to their left side, they saw this being, which was described as being 10 feet tall, plated aluminum gunship exterior with fluted type wrinkles near the bottom of the being. There were 2 antennas sticking out on the right and left side. There was a red head which had beaming, almost welder's goggles intensity for the eyes. The top of the cap of this being had a spade-shaped helmet. Now, when this thing shot down these beams of light, they were horrified, went down the hill, and later the authorities came. They did smell a very strange metallic ozone diffused smell that was around the entire localized area. So there was multiple eyewitnesses, multiple physical traces for this particular case. A sighting of a 65-foot diameter craft. This was Bristol, Pennsylvania, October 17th, 1973. October 9th, 1972, Long Island, New York. A couple was driving down the road. They saw a white light approach them. It started getting larger. The wife told the husband to pull off to the side of the road. He did not exit the vehicle because he didn't want the traffic to hit him as he was looking out. He did roll down his window. She got out of the car, looked up, got a very good look at the bottom side of this vehicle, which was described as being an iron without the conventional handle. There were rectangular, elongated lights on the bottom surface of the vehicle. A low-frequency sewing machine humming noise was associated with the craft. But then there were these very interesting poles that exited the vertical aft section of the craft that was tied together by this ion-inducing, very low-diameter steel rod that connected the two posts at the top. So if you look at what's happening here, and you look at the historical legacy of the T. Townsend Brown effect, you'll notice almost the identical configuration here. We've got a capacitor. We're charging one side positive. We're charging the other side negative. And so when you do that, you get a resultant movement in the direction of the positive charge. That may be what has happened with that Long Island case. Again, here's lifter in action. They're doing essentially the same thing that I'm proposing was happening with that craft. January 24th, 1934, Finland. The townspeople of Vasa all clearly saw a UFO streaking overhead, ejecting a long tongue of flames behind it as it circled a few times, then sped away. 1966, over South Vietnam. This is the case that I went over last night that was described by my friend Mark McCandlish, who is the world's foremost premier aerospace illustrator. He interviewed one of the crew members on this case. Took place over South Vietnam. This case took place at night. This B-52, which you see on the dot on the very right, was flying a night mission. They were doing a repair mission from Guam, and they were shocked to find a gigantic flying saucer. Conservatively was probably just over a quarter mile in diameter, a gigantic craft. Along the circumference of this craft, there was a series of rotor blades that were revolving around the vertical axis. He could also see that there were 28 floors, approximately 280 feet total, of transparent pane glass windows with beings looking at the B-52 as they circled it 3 times. Now, as this thing departed, and here's an AutoCAD rendering of the craft from Mark's original sketch. As this departed, this craft opened up some type of space-time continuum, either at the localized area or it opened up some type of wormhole on the other side of the Earth, which was in daylight at the time, because the pilot and co-pilot could see bright blue sky, puffy white clouds, and the sun. And as this thing went through that wormhole, it slowly trickled back to nighttime. And when the B-52 landed safely at its destination, they were debriefed by FBI. But this is an actual original case file. Here is what it looked like as it was coming near. This is what it looked like just as it was circling the craft. The B-52 was making 3 left-hand turns, and this is the vehicle as it's departing. September 9th, 1968, Dong Hae, Vietnam. A helicopter crew of the U.S. knew it was no Viet Cong craft that made fantastic maneuvers through the sky for 20 minutes, but was a genuine UFO. Another belated UFO report to the JT, that's the Journal Tribune. This is May 1967, Blackwell, Oklahoma. This was reported 10 years after the event actually took place. I'm sure the entire townspeople saw this, but this craft, which was described as over a football field in diameter, gunship gray in color because there were some ambient lights, dropped down 500 feet vertically very fast. Obviously, lighter than air vehicles don't really do this, but then it traveled about 500 feet toward the east, he could see that there was a gondola connected to the main portion of the vehicle. There were blue and white alternating lights associated with the bottom of the craft. One of the green glass transparent panels was open, exposing the interior of the vehicle, and he said that there was a green gaseous substance exiting that. After this thing flew by, it lost the field of view, and here is the actual AutoCAD rendering of it here, and you can see the location of the alternating blue and white lights. May 1967. In 1952, over Washington, D.C., documented a Navy jet shot at a small 2-foot saucer like World War II foes and dislodged a 1-pound chunk of metal, which is in U.S. Air Force hands as proof positive that UFOs exist. The flying Truss Bridge, sighted March 5th, 2003, Helena, Missouri. Now, I got this from the CUFOS files directly. This is the AutoCAD redraw from the CUFOS original. I cleaned it up. I'll just read you this little section in the middle here. Craft caused pictures to fall off the living room wall and shook the entire house as it passed by overhead. So definitely there was some physical effects here. He said it was 1 football field in length. The entire interior of the vehicle was composed of these glass transparent panels exposing the truss bridge type construction. There was a fluorescent light that blinked on every 15 seconds. But what's interesting here, he kept stressing in this report that this thing had girder and truss beam construction just like you would find in one of these old vintage bridges. He also said that there were rusted rivets holding this thing together. So here again, we hear about this rivet. So again, are alien craft using rivets to hold their vehicles together? Here you can see what it may have looked like, this truss beam construction and these old vintage metal rivets that are holding this thing in place. A good view of these rusted rivets here. January 3rd, 1968, Belgrade. Over 3,000 witnesses watched 3 cylindrical UFOs, some 50 or 60 feet long, that glowed a deep red and hovered over the city for 20 minutes, allowing photos to be taken that Yugoslav officials are studying. May 25th, 1967, Castro Valley. This is an interesting case because a husband and wife saw this through their 3rd-story apartment. They even had binoculars to see it, approximately 1,000 feet altitude. It was spewing out a red flame on the bottom of the vehicle, just where you see the porthole here. But then he said that he saw plates holding this thing together, seams just like you would see on an F-104, and then rivets. If you look closely, you can see the rivets from the original sketch. So another case where rivets are holding these craft together. When Canadian Steve Michalk approached the UFO in Manitoba, he saw a hatchway open from which came the sound of voices in an alien language, also a peculiar violet beam of light radiating out. Long craft spotted over northwest Alabama, August 8, 2005, Florence, Alabama. Originally, the eyewitnesses who saw this thought that this was 2 separate aircraft because they were flying in tandem very close to each other. But then as they got a very closer view of this vehicle, which had a single light up front, but you can actually see there were 2 because they were spread along the circumference nose of the vehicle, and there were 3 to 4 lights at the aft end, and that's why it looked like 2 separate vehicles. But they said that this thing was a very silent type craft as it flew by, according to the original case file. January 10th, 1968, over Exeter, California. This case came from a current Phillips 66 gas station owner who was filling up a tank of one of his patrons. He looked off to the right and saw this, what he quote, a gigantic shaped acorn vehicle that had square portholes along the circumference of the bottom of the craft. There was a brake line near the mid portion of this vehicle. That section remained stationary. Oh, that's the craft part that did revolve. It was the bottom that remained stationary. It took off toward the east out of his field of view. July 1957, 3 months before Sputnik 1, a gigantic red mystery satellite was visible to the naked eye and seen by thousands, probably a gigantic mothership that released UFO scouts. So again, cigar-shaped craft, gigantic in size. June 14th, 1974, Medellin, Spain. Very interesting case where this particular craft was following this gentleman's car. He was shocked and horrified. He got out of the car, went to the house, picked up a pitchfork, ran next to this craft. This craft did not move the entire day. It stayed there the entire day. It had a cone-shaped conical section on top. There were 3 beings who were seen inside an elongated transparent window. Each being was standing behind some type of a lever. Now, after it started getting dark, there was a spark of light and this thing disappeared. So again, very unusual case sighting. May 6, 1968, 10:30 p.m., camping out with a friend, Joseph Plazo of Elwira, Ohio, saw an amazing skull-shaped UFO surrounded by flames which flashed down an intense searchlight beam for several minutes before flying away. The I-5 UFO case, this is a really good case, July 12, 2004. This has been reported by many different individuals. What has been reported as a Vulcan-shaped flying craft with a high-intensity white light up front and 2 high-intensity white lights on the port and starboard wing, making this kidney beam flight path. But the problem is, this craft was violating every FAA regulations, because the FAA mandates that when you fly a private aircraft, you need to be, when you're flying over a populated area, 1,000 feet above any person, place, or thing. But this thing was dropping to 5 feet above a major expressway, violating all FAA regulations, but they never could determine what this was, cited by many different people over years of time. Mid-1957, Norwood, New Jersey, out of her kitchen window, Miss Olive A. Sesfeld was astonished to observe a large cigar-shaped UFO hovering over the ground while indistinct figures moved about on some unknown mission for several minutes before departing. Just a quick case from Daytona Beach, Florida. A flat, acorn-shaped vehicle was interacting with the water near Daytona Beach. This is all we have on this particular case file. November 1967, East Pakistan. People were awed to witness 3 giant cigars streaking overhead with trails of sparks behind them across the whole sky, lighting up the night brightly. So again, we're seeing this historical legacy of these large cigar-shaped vehicles. May 14th, 1988, Gresham, Oregon. I spoke to the lady who was the primary witness on this case. She was driving down the road with her husband. This took place at night. This craft, who they originally thought was an advertising helicopter or dirigible or blimp, had these rotating square rectangular panels that were rotating along the circumference of the vehicle. It was giving off some type of heat. Now, after a few minutes, this vehicle traveled from approximately 10 feet altitude to 3,000 feet altitude in 3 seconds. So that's 1,000 feet per second. Very high G maneuver. Once that happened, it flew around a commercial airliner that was landing at the nearby airport. It got back toward the tail of the vehicle, then started going up the port side of the aircraft, stayed just back of the left wing of the airliner, and when she said, quote, it got bored with that, it shot off at a high rate of speed. So this craft was no doubt under intelligent control. It had a conning tower up top, somewhat like a submarine, that was 1/3 the diameter of the main vehicle. Main vehicle was approximately 45 feet in length. In diameter, she said that the exterior of the craft was inky black, just like an F-117 stealth fighter. So we definitely have her case on file. October 1967, Devon, England. Nightly for almost a month, a queen football-shaped UFO with a cross rod and feathered fins, not a Lockheed project, hovered over town and was seen by scores of witnesses. It would stay 40 degrees alongside the rising sun, then switch to the other side for a while. Unsolved riddle, absolutely. April 3rd, 1982, Bolingbrook, Illinois. This was seen by a Chicago school teacher at the time. She drove back on a Friday night. She was relaxing, getting ready for the weekend. She was awakened very early in the morning. This would be Saturday morning. There was a blue light shining into her window. There was a low-frequency humming noise. She looked out and saw this craft ascend, descend. This happened twice. Here you can see where it actually took place. This is landing spot number 1 at the sort of the X location, and then landing spot number 2 is just toward the right. It did interact with the electrical wires, and they were arcing down the next morning. The police did make a report. So this is another good case file where there were multiple eyewitnesses and multiple physical trace cases associated with the craft itself. Are there creatures from many worlds that land on Earth? One type was sworn by Maurice Messy of France as a being small humanoid of very odd appearance, which landed in the farmer's field on July 1st, 1965. February 19th, 1968, Saskatchewan, Canada. This is a case where this was seen by one eyewitness over a farm area. The craft made 3 circular orbits over their telephone pole that had an electrical transformer on it. Once it got bored with that, it went along the grain silos and took off at a high rate of speed. But what's interesting here is she said that this craft had a vent-shaped section on the top, kind of like a heating register. There were 4 poles going up toward the top that terminated in a point where there was a tennis ball-shaped section on the top. But then, here again, looking at the bottom of the vehicle, we see these metallic skin panels again being fastened by rivets. So there's at least 4 cases now where we're seeing these rivets again. July 18th, 1967, Boardman, Ohio, the Reverend Anthony DiPaolo described seeing a UFO land in his driveway, out of which stepped an undersized but bulky humanoid whose whole figure glowed like an electric light bulb. May 23rd, 2001, this was seen by a retired aerospace engineer mechanic, over 30 years experience. He saw this craft just after he pulled off the I-ramp in Park, Michigan, and he said that it was a gigantic, completely black craft. No details were actually seen on the bottom of the vehicle, but it was completely silent, went directly forward and above him. November 28th, 1954, near Caracas, Venezuela, 2 truck drivers came upon several hairy humanoids of dwarf size with 3-fingered claws, hands, and strikingly glowing eyes which could leap amazingly high even when carrying heavy stones into their hovering saucer. February 4th, 1968, Redlands, California. Interesting case because in this case there are over 200 eyewitnesses who saw this craft descend and made a forward bob just to the forward of this craft. Then it bobbed back. It shot up straight. But what's interesting here, Redlands, California is very near Norton Air Force Base, which is now San Bernardino International Airport. Now, anybody here who knows anything about Norton Air Force Base, it's always been rumored that there was a top secret hangar on Norton that housed a UFO-type craft. So this may have been associated with that particular sighting. July 23rd, 1947, Peru, Brazil. While surveying, Jose Higgins met a small humanoid who displayed great strength, tossing huge boulders, and who could leap with amazing agility despite his size and weight. Here's what we have on this case. Very difficult thing to draw, but here is his original sketch. He said that this was approximately 200 feet in length. It was traveling at 500 miles an hour. He saw this pacing an airliner. It did go in back of a puffy cloud. It did not exit the side of the vehicle, but there were no propellers, there were no wings, there were no vertical stabilizers. He couldn't really discern any engines, but here is his case file. Among the various monster men reported, one of the oddest was that sighted in Belo Horizonte, Brazil, a tall, thin creature with no ears or nose and one single eye whose skin color was a brilliant scarlet. I mean, this is just crazy reports, but they just keep coming in. They just keep coming in. April 6, 1986, the townspeople of Chiefland, Florida were horrified and shocked and scared to see this craft. It had 2 green lights at the aft end of the vehicle and then 1 high intensity red light shining down at the forward section of the craft. August 22nd, 1968, Kalgoorlie, Australia, pilots Gordon Smith and Walter Garden of Perth came upon a huge white UFO from which emerged 6 smaller saucers. After cruising around, they returned to the mother ship, which sped away. December 22nd, 1968, Porto Alegre, Brazil. This case is completely written in this particular language. I couldn't read the entire case, but what I could discern here is that this 25-foot diameter craft landed just on the roadway. Now, I'm willing to bet that the gentleman here who has the shotgun or rifle, he fired first. Then there was a green beam that came out of this craft to his location. He was shooting at the 3 humanoids. And if you see Maria here, she was smart about this. She got out of this. So she was the only clear thinking in this entire case. I don't know what happened to him. So, but that's what's happening here. Every time we have some type of ET visitation or we're getting ready to meet our space brothers, they're always met with the barrel of a shotgun. So it's no wonder they don't land on the White House lawn. They're unidentified flying objects. Let's shoot one and see if they're friendly. That is the official Air Force policy. They want to see how they can benefit and have the most advanced and efficient weapons delivery platform. They're not interested in making friendly relations with these. They want to get the technology associated with it. U.S. Air Force official aircraft identification chart. So to the Air Force, everything is a joke. Everything is a weather balloon to them. Practically everything. It's now reached a comical joke stage. June 27th, 1959, Boulogne, New Guinea. This is the famous Father Gill case. 28 eyewitnesses independently verified this case where this cylindrical object came down over the village. We believe there were 4 pogo-type landing gear legs, but it's not been confirmed. It's also thought that these may have been light coming from the craft that stopped at a specific location. The top portion of the vehicle was completely engulfed in white light, but you'll also notice that there was other UFOs associated with this original sighting. The 4 beings on top did wave at the people below, and that's why it says that that's the case where they wave back. So this is a dead solid case. March 1967, Don Anderson of Wacombe, Pennsylvania, in daylight saw a gigantic Zeppelin hanging motionless among clouds with 6 strange booms on its top. December 11th, 1996, Yukon Territory, Canada. This, in my opinion, is a mind-blowing case. 28 separate eyewitnesses confirmed seeing this in Yukon Territory, Canada. You can see here, this is the rendering. It was believed to be, through trigonometry and triangulation, to be between 1/2 mile and 1 mile in diameter. There was a multi-series of colored lights along the circumference. The bottom of the vehicle did have white lights that were in a pie-shaped configuration. Here you can see the layout of how this thing appeared. It went down the freeway. That's where all these people saw it. It was seen hovering over the frozen Fox Lake as it turned to the upper northeast conditions. So again, at least 28 eyewitnesses did see that craft. August 5th, 1965, the Air Force's Keyway radar station in Upper Michigan picked up a V formation of UFOs flying across Lake Superior at a speed of 9,000 miles per hour at an altitude nearly 17,000 feet. The Air Force could not deny they were solid objects. So 1965, we've got things that are traveling 9,000 miles per hour. It's a good case file. March 29th, 1966, Hampton Falls, New Hampshire. This craft was seen by a single gentleman who was taking his German Shepherd out for a walk. He looked into the forest area, and to his surprise, he saw a boxy, inverted L-shaped craft with 2 round portholes in the side of the vehicle. There was a half-spheroid dome on the bottom. There were cylindrical rods coming out that were connected to rectangular bar aluminum type configuration landing gear pads. After about a minute, there was a pulse of air that came out from the bottom of it. This is the original sketch. You can see the leaves blowing out from the bottom of this vehicle. It popped up about 1 foot altitude, made a 360, came down. 2 minutes passed, then this same exact thing happened. The next time it flew up to about 10 feet altitude and then hovered away at a slow rate of speed. May 24th, 1964, the Holloman Air Force Base radar unit detected 2 UFOs that on 2 different occasions chased missiles being tested on the White Sands Missile Range. No radar angels or, quote, illusions were responsible. White Sands. July 20th, 2005, Exeter, New Hampshire. Very good case. A gentleman was mowing his lawn, just beginning his yard work for the day. He put gas in the lawnmower, was taking a drink of water, and as soon as he put his drink down near the lawnmower, he saw this elongated mothership or cigar-shaped craft that had a row of square rectangular windows all along the length of both sides. He said that this was twice as large as a Nimitz-class aircraft carrier. After 2 minutes of this sighting, there was a golden reddish flame mist below the vehicle. It stretched out to 2 times its original length and then disappeared. So we have his case on file. December 29th, 1964, 2 UFOs speeding at 4,800 miles per hour and making a U-turn in the sky showed up on radar at the Navy's Putent Air Station, Maryland. The Navy refused to agree with the Air Force in calling them false images. Police officer flying triangle sighting. All we have on this case is the original sketch, which is reproduced here in AutoCAD format. October 27th, 1997, location unknown. I got this from Coast to Coast AM. Object disappeared after 15 seconds at approximately 100 knots. That's the bottom view here. Multicolored lights on the bottom surface. Craft appeared flat gray or dark gray in color. No lights, actually. No exhaust flames, no engine noise. It was silent. October 10th, 1966, among hundreds of police sightings all over the country, Sergeant Ben Thompson of Wanacue, New Jersey, spied a huge saucer that flew low over the reservoir and stirred up waves in the water. So again, interaction with UFOs in the water. July 9th, 1952, Hasselbeck, Germany. Interesting case where a father and daughter were driving their motorcycle down the road in Germany. His tire went out, he had a blowout, pulled off to the side of the road. His daughter actually saw something in the open clearing here. She pointed this out to her father. They both walked up and saw 2 humanoids next to this frying pan UFO. It had a black conical tower up on the top of the vehicle. There was a series of elongated rectangular portholes along the circumference of the craft. Now, when the beings who were near the vehicle noticed them, they jumped on the top of that conical tower. They disappeared. Seconds later, this tower retracted into the midsection of the vehicle and then retracted down, pushing the vehicle up. Once that happened, flames started rotating along the circumference of the vehicle, and then this thing shot away. But very interesting case with multiple eyewitnesses. March 26, 1880, almost a century ago, this is way beyond that, the people of Gillistu Junction, New Mexico, were startled to observe a giant fish-shaped airship sail over in which a group of humanoids sang loudly enough to be heard below. Huh. June 1st, 1967, this was seen by a 7-year-old child when it descended through the very heavy brush where he was at. It was in the inverted position. It looked like a hubcap. As soon as it got about 10 feet altitude, it flipped over onto the upright position. There were a number of landing gear legs at the bottom of the vehicle. Then what happened next was interesting. There was a shotgun noise, and this pendulum that was on top flipped over to one side. This thing started taking off into the vertical. His aunt saw this too, so we have 2 independent confirmations of this. This is the original historical file for that case. October 13th, 1966, near Mexico City, in their village, 3 Mexican women fled in fright when a UFO landed and 3 humanoids 10 feet tall stepped out displaying red eyes but no mouths or noses. March 30th, 1995, Transvaal, South Africa. Interesting case where a gentleman was driving down the perimeter of this road. Originally, he noticed a man who was blocking his face from something, and then when he turned the corner, he saw a flying saucer with a hull breach on the port side of the vehicle, triangular tripod legs. There were no beings seen in this at all. 2 minutes later, while he was in some type of a magnetic lock, he could not move his body. This thing departed, and then as it departed, he was able to regain his muscle activity. He looked off to the side, and the gentleman who was shielding his eyes was seen riding his bicycle down a dirt road. So this case we now have on file. July 4th, 1962, La Pampa, Argentina. In the fields of farmer's wife was shocked to see a landed UFO from which stepped not the usual little humanoid, but a small robot who quickly jumped back in his machine and flew off. The flaming ellipse, which I have called this particular case, sighted December 26, 1972 in Venezuela. A couple was on the top of their apartment. They were looking, this actually took place at night. They were looking at the aircraft go by, landing in the final approach to the local airport. And this elongated ellipse-shaped craft flew no more than 150 feet above them. The gentleman described that it had two hemispherical capacitors that were kind of in the slanted forward position. There was a conducting arc that was constantly lit between those two capacitors. He said that what looked like cast iron exhaust ports were along the both right and left side of the vehicle. Also at the aft end of the vehicle, you could see it also had these cast port lights too. But then what was really interesting is there were these S-shaped flames, but he described them not looking as flames, but as some type of a wave-shaped plasma that emanated all throughout the cast iron exhaust ports of this vehicle. Now, as this thing flew over, 5 minutes later, an identical craft to this flew over too. Very interesting case file. Both on April 24th, 1949, and on March 8th, 1950, mysterious orbiting bodies were spied in tracking telescopes going at least 7 miles per second over seven years before either Russia or America launched artificial satellites. So who had these things flying before Sputnik? Who had these things flying before that time? July 19th, 1965, in Australia, this gentleman's walking down the beach. He was 400 feet from this vehicle. He could hear the dogs barking at this craft. When he got within 60 feet of the craft, this thing took off, the dogs start barking, and that was the end of this case. In 1962, during two different high-altitude flights of the X-15 rocket ship above 60 miles, pilots Joe Walker and Major Bob White both reported mystery objects higher up, which may have been UFOs in orbit. Now, this is a dead solid case. It was reported in local newspapers. It has been reported. X-15 pilot, now in this particular case, the camera mounted on the X-15 was mounted on the aft of the vehicle looking toward the back. So the pilot did not actually see the UFOs, but he did see them on the motion picture film reels that were recovered from the X-15. Now, the Air Force tried to explain this away as liquid oxygen chipping off the external tank. That may be a possibility, but according to the pilots that have flown this, what they saw were flying saucers and cylindrical objects following the X-15 that is somewhat consistent with what astronaut John Glenn had seen when he went into space, because he reported seeing golden fireflies around his capsule, but he said that they were not following his capsule, they were coming toward his capsule, meaning it was not associated with the capsule itself. July 25th, 1993, Fontana, California. Not much is written about this case, but two men were stargazing. One of the gentlemen asked his friend to come see what he was looking at. He saw this elliptical-shaped craft that had these retracting arms on the lower portion of the vehicle. December 21st, 1964, Fisherville, Virginia. While driving Horace Burns' saw a giant UFO shaped like a beehive with a dome on top measuring 125 feet in diameter and 80 to 90 feet high. He saw it land for a while, then flew away. Summer 1961, Bloomington, Illinois. I contacted the gentleman who was involved in this case. He was going to the university in Bloomington at the time, at the library to study. They both exited their dorms at the identical time. They looked up and saw this vehicle. A lady across from where their apartment complex was, she saw it too. And here's the rendering from the original case file. It had elliptical windows or portholes along the circumference top dome section of the vehicle, and this flew away at a slow rate of speed. He was a retired McDonnell Douglas aerospace engineer. Very credible witness report. December 26, 1926, Hot Springs, South Dakota. Two state policemen, Donald Kleem and Jack Peters, were amazed to witness a huge salad bowl UFO that bobbed and skittered through the air without a sound. 1979, Sequin, Texas. This was seen by a single eyewitness. Now you'll notice here that there are actually two UFOs associated with this particular case. One was smaller in diameter, had a light on top, a light on the bottom. It descended near the local baseball field, about 1 to 2 feet in altitude. Then it ascended out of range, and then a couple minutes later, a larger craft did the exact same thing, but this had two male humanoids and one female humanoid in this vehicle. Then this ascended, went out of the field of view. So this is an interesting double UFO case file. April 27th, 1950, near Goshen, Indiana, a huge red wheel-like saucer paced a TWA DC-3 airliner for miles, alarming the passengers and crew before it finally dived away at a terrific speed. January 18th, 1971, Quincy, Illinois. Very little information came from this case. This was a MUFON file. A woman and her daughter were driving down the road. They saw this vehicle flying in above them. What they did is they did a complete U-turn from their location, went home, and then she saw this projection screen, kind of like a slide projector light, come out, focus, and then this thing flew away. July 23rd, 1948, near Montgomery, Alabama, a huge cigar-shaped UFO zoomed straight in an airliner, then veered sharply to one side and shot upward out of sight in seconds. May 13th, 1972, Canterbury, New Hampshire. Two boys were sleeping in a rusted-down chicken coop when this thing shone a bright light on them. It had 4 landing gear legs with Apollo-type landing pads. It had rectangular protrusions from the circumference of the vehicle. There was a red flashing light on one side, one steady light on the other side, but then these very interesting braided hydraulic hoses were on the top portion of this vehicle. Now, it's never been explained what the purpose was for those were, but here is the actual color rendering from the original case. September 1952, Topcliffe, England. A saucer swooped down as a British meteor jet landed, hovered above for a while, then shot away at supersonic speed. June 24th, 1981, Godletsville, Tennessee. This gentleman claimed he saw 4 different models of this vehicle at 4 different times. So I took his original sketch and rendered it per the historical sketch. So we have his case on file. August 28th, 1952, near Leroy, New York, an impossible speed that would wrench any Earth craft apart. A saucer literally flew rings around an airliner, making tight vertical circles. So the bottom line of what we're seeing here is that clearly a large percent of these craft perhaps are man-made craft by Lockheed, by Rockwell, by the Skunk Works, but the remaining craft, the remaining portion of these represent the core of reality of this phenomenon. Now, I'm convinced that there is a very serious battle going on between the community of disclosure, which hopefully all of us are involved in, a battle between us and the privatized military defense contractor who have a policy of shutting things down, of secrecy, and of trying to take the wind out of our sails. But as we come closer together as a coalition to move this subject matter forward and more into the public domain, I believe that we are going to win this battle. And as it's been said that no lie can last forever, I believe we are going to accomplish our mission, and I want to thank you for your attention.
Thanks so much. That was wonderful. Outstanding.